So is this finally going to be the year that we see some gold for specifically Ronnie, but probably even Michael Harris at this point? Look, Ronnie is, besides having just an MVP caliber season and maybe the best player in Major League Baseball, he's been outstanding on defense this year. He's throwing guys out left and right, right? Every night that there's a highlight reel of what Ronnie is doing out in the field to throw somebody out, right? He had to throw the other day to third base and punched out a guy. So now this is all coming together for Ronnie, right? Like he's healthy, he's invigorated, everything is coming together for him. And I think that this is the year that we see gold come Ronnie's way and maybe Michael Harris's way as well. Michael Harris obviously was a spectacular defensive outfielder last year, making all kinds of highlight reel catches. And sometimes when you get guys that are at that level, the gold glove doesn't catch up to them, right? Like the gold glove is one of those things that it feels like you have to get yourself into that club and kind of break through into that club. Once you're there, once you get into that club, then you can be a member of it for decades, right? Even Max Fried is a guy who's won gold gloves. Andrew Jones obviously was, one of the best defensive center fielders in the history of the entire sport. But once you get on that role and you get into that group, and it's always been an award of, how do I say, it's always been an award that is, once you're in that group, they're going to give it to you every year. I'll give you Steve Garvey as an example for you, people that, go way back in baseball lore and things like that. Steve Garvey was not a very good defensive first baseman, all by and large. Yes, he didn't make errors, but he had no range at first base. He had no arm to speak of. That's why he was a converted third baseman, because he couldn't play third base. He didn't have the arm to play third base. So he was a converted third baseman that went to first. And yes, he could make good catches at first base. He could certainly, pick it, and he didn't make any errors. But as far as his value defensively, he wasn't a great range guy, and he certainly didn't have a very good arm. But because of his lack of errors and things like that, he was a gold glove winner every single year. He got into that club, right? He got into that club where, okay, Steve Garvey, oh, well, we know he's a really good defensive player. Let's give him the gold glove. Oh, well, he's the most deserving. Look, Steve Garvey's won 4 gold gloves. Let's give him 5, 6, 7 gold gloves. And that's how that kind of works. I mean, that's that club that you have to get yourself into. And so I think that Ronnie and maybe to a degree, Michael Harris finally find their way into that club, because Ronnie has been outstanding. Now, I thought that Dansby Swanson in 2020 should have won the gold glove. Like he was legitimately, I think, screwed out of the gold glove in the pandemic shortened season. Javier Baez for the Cubs was the shortstop that won the gold glove that year. And it took a few years to catch up to Dansby Swanson, right? He had been a really good defensive shortstop for a few years. And I thought that he got screwed in 2020. And then last year in 2022, he finally ends up winning his first gold glove, and well deserved, because he'd been one of the best shortstops in Major League Baseball over the last few years. It just took a while for the system to catch up to Dansby Swanson. So I do think that this is coming together now for Ronnie, that when we talk about really good defensive outfields, when you have Michael Harris in center, Ronnie in right, that's one of the best 1-2 punches defensively in all of Major League Baseball. And the fact is that Ronnie keeps coming up with all of these highlight reel plays, right? We see him throw a guy out at home. We see Michael Harris throw a guy out at home. We see Ronnie the other day, throw a guy out at third base. I mean, they're coming up with not just the catches, but certainly the big throws to get guys out. I think Michael Harris has the best from center to home as far as speed of throw and things like that. I mean, again, there's all these metrics that you can get into, but here's what I know. When you turn on ESPN, you find that those guys are making highlight play after highlight play after highlight play every single night. And hopefully that this is the year that Ronnie and maybe Michael Harris, maybe he's still not, old enough to get into that club. Maybe he's still going to have his ID checked and he's going to, be told by the bouncer that he's not quite old enough to be in the club just yet. But I definitely think that whether Ronnie wins the MVP award or not, this is the year that you see him win that gold glove, that he's finally recognized for what his defensive performance is and what it means. And assuming that he can stay healthy, right? Assuming that he plays a full season healthy, or at least, 150 plus games of a season. And that he's obviously very healthy. And we'll talk about health here in just a second. But, certainly if he has a season like he's having so far, yes, the MVP might be in the mix, but maybe we'll finally see some gold come Ronnie's way. And maybe the Braves will have two of the three outfielders when all is said and done with gold gloves in their trophy case, because certainly these guys are making highlight reel catches and throws every single night in baseball. All right, we want to remind you to, when you make Hittin' Hard your first listen, you head over to the comment section of whatever platform that you're on, whether it's YouTube or what have you, and leave us a comment that you are an everyday listener. So we call them our everydayers. So we want to know who is our everyday listeners as our everydayers. We thank you so much for being a part of our community, as we're now a little bit more than a year old in this adventure. And we thank you so much for being a part of the show and being that everyday listener. So acknowledge yourself in the comment section. Let us know that you're an everydayer as you listen in 5 days a week to Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery.